Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.
I'm Ian Richards, welcoming you to InFocus, a weekly program that takes a closer look at what's happening within and across the government of St. Kitts and Nevis. Now, today we'll be having a discussion about World Water Day and the activities here in St. Kitts and Nevis. With the recent celebration, of course, St. Kitts and Nevis, we're going to take a closer look at the steps being taken to secure our water supply for the future. With declining rainfall, growing demand, and the readiness of climate change, water security has become one of the most pressing issues facing us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. The government has been responding with a series of major initiatives, from the commissioning of the Bastia desalination plant to the drilling of new wells across the island, and exploration continues, all aimed at achieving reliable 24/7 access to potable water. Joining us for this important conversation today is the Minister responsible for water, the Honourable Konris Maynard. Stay with us for InFocus as we explore the theme, Building Tomorrow Through Sustainable Water.
Mr. Maynard behind the Lincoln Maynard, I don't know if you know him. I grew up with him. And he worked at a place called the Carib Brewery. And he told me a long time ago he ain't buying no bottled water. Because as a chemist, he was able to test the water coming from our system and realize not a thing wrong with it. And so I continue to drink the water from the Water Services Department. But some of us, we buy $5 for our drinking water, for a gallon or less. Meanwhile, the government on average charges $7.30 for 1,000 gallons. Whenever you buy a bottle of water, know that you're paying over $5,000 for water that you could get from the government for $7.30.
Thanks for staying with us, and allow me now to welcome to our program the Honourable Konris Maynard. I should say welcome back, Minister. Of course, you've been here several times before, and it's always a pleasure to have you. It's wonderful to have you again for this important discussion.
It is my pleasure to be here, Ian.
Okay, so let's jump right into it because we have a lot to cover. And of course, as I mentioned in the opening, St. Kitts and Nevis, traditionally we have celebrated World Water Day, which happens every year on March 22nd. Now, of course, the department has organized a series of activities to celebrate the month. And I want to start, dear Minister, as I mentioned, it's tradition. But for those who may not understand why St. Kitts and Nevis joins with the rest of the world to celebrate World Water Day, why is it important?
Well, water is life and every drop counts. And so we must use every opportunity to pass on that message and to encourage conservation and to acknowledge that it is not everywhere in the world that water is readily accessible. As you would know from the speech, people around the world, in particular women, spend millions of hours each day traveling to collect water. And so this year, the theme is basically if we improve water, if we increase access to water, it improves empowerment of even women in certain parts of the world. We may not have that direct challenge here where people have to travel miles for water, but women are still, in general, the head of our households largely here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And they're the ones who have to adapt and make changes when it is that water is not accessible 24 hours a day. And so we join in that clarion call to observe water because water is life, and it links to every part of our development as a society.
Let's localize it, Minister. Of course, as you just touched on, you made an address to mark the observance. And you made some interesting points, and I think I'm going to use that to form most part of our discussion today, because there are some key points that you raised. Let's start off with, initially, of course, St. Kitts and Nevis relies heavily on rainfall for its water supply, which is also collected from surface water sources and underground wells. But we've seen over the years, and we have felt it, the average annual rainfall has declined, and statistics say it continues to decline. It may be a silly question to some, but what are the implications of this?
Right, so that's a very important question. Firstly, before desalination, 100% of our water supply came from rainfall. And so if you have a situation where over a decade or just about a decade, there is a reduction of rainfall by almost 20%, around 18%, you can see the significant impact that will have if you're depending 100% on rainfall. And so it is a very important question in order to highlight that when water is reduced, it means then that we do not have the ability to access that water because we do not have control over it. For instance, it's not just necessarily about the downward amount of rainfall that we are having or experiencing, but also the fact that it is unpredictable. So for instance, this year, the rainfall has been, or last year, I think it was a little higher, but we can't predict that that is what is going to continue in the future. And so we now have to adapt. We now have to find ways of how we can ensure that we have a reliable source of water that is not as unpredictable as our changing climate is today.
And the thing about, of course, with the rainfall, that the water has to seep through. It has to be, the ground has to be saturated, that the water will seep through and go into the underground wells. But we've experienced very brief rainfalls. I recall growing up that when rain would fall, it would fall and fall. You know, the term cats and dogs. But now it's like a little sprinkle and that's it.
Right. And so you make a very important point. When the rain falls, about 80% of it goes back into the atmosphere, used by the plants, and goes back up into the atmosphere to facilitate the water cycle. About 2% of it runs off to the ocean, by what I'm told, and about 18% of it permeates the ground to go in our underground aquifer. Now, those underground aquifers are where we get the water from. So if the rainfall reduces, then those wells are obviously then replenished less, but we still continue to withdraw the same amount. Now, the opposite is true. Wells that we dig usually have what is called a safe yield. So when we find a well, we will determine that it is safe to take, let's say, 1,000 gallons out of that well per day. Whether it rains heavy the night before or light, we still only can take out 1,000 gallons out of that well in order to safeguard the integrity of that well. So there are some, for instance, in our country who live in parts of the island where there is, you know, more consistent rainfall, let's say Newton Ground, St. Paul's, etc. And so they will consistently ask, well, it's raining, why can't I get the water? Well, the truth is that a lot of your source actually comes from those underground wells, which we can only pump a certain amount, whether it rains lightly or heavily in recent times. But overall, over a period of time, if the rainfall decreases over time, then when we start and continue to withdraw at those rates, we now begin to introduce integrity concerns for the well, because it's possible that we could pull, for instance, salt water into our wells. As you would know or may not know, our aquifers usually sit above salt water. So on top is fresh water, below is salt water. If it's not being replenished at the same rate over many years, and we continue to extract at the same rate, then you see the challenges that we could have.
And of course, one says that salt water intrusion, the well is essentially lost.
Right, for generations. It's like, for instance, I often like to compare it to how should I do it? If you have, you can do a test at home. If you have salt water on the bottom, very, very saline water at the bottom, and you gently and lightly put water on top and build fresh water on top, you can safely take off the fresh water on top without it mixing. But if you stir it up and all of that salt water now becomes part of everything, it's now impossible to separate in any space of time. You need years for that to be replenished, generations.
That's an experiment I'm willing to try, certainly. That's very interesting. All right, so what are the long-term implications then, Minister? And of course, we speak about climate change being one of the main factors of the reduced rainfall. What are the long-term implications for St. Kitts and Nevis?
For the reduced rainfall, right. So the long-term implication obviously is that we're not going to be able to produce water, because we don't have a situation where, for instance, once I visited Dominica, and God bless Dominica, but one thing that was clear to me is that I wish that we could have even 1 or 2 or 3 of those rivers that they have, because from driving to the airport to where I was staying, no less than 20 rivers were crossed that are running off to the ocean. That's a consistent source of water that, with infrastructural development, you can utilize. There is no place in St. Kitts or Nevis where we have a river running full to the ocean. Yeah. So, given that fact that we have to go to the mountains to find sources, that it has to permeate to underground aquifers, if that rainfall reduces, we really don't have a buffer as to how much water we can collect, and therefore affects everything else that surrounds water: development, housing, tourism, agriculture, you name it.
Right. And so how would you describe the current water security here in St. Kitts and Nevis?
Well, St. Kitts and Nevis is designated as a water scarce country by the UN, meaning compared to other areas, we do not and cannot generate as much water naturally, especially for the population that we have. We will exhaust it as our population goes, as more demand happens for industry, etc. So we are designated as a water scarce country. And so we now have to find additional sources of water in order for us to have the ability to continue to develop. And that is where we have now, as a government, decided to invest heavily in ensuring that we're not only focusing or hoping that rainfall will increase, that we will continue to find underground wells. We have to find a way to generate new sources of water.
And so it's a lot more than hope and pray. You must be proactive. You must take action. So tell us a bit about some of the actions that the government has taken to improve the water situation here in St. Kitts and Nevis, because of course the ultimate aim, as has been set up by yourself, as has been set up by the Prime Minister, is to get St. Kitts and Nevis back to 24/7 water as much as possible.
Right. Now, when I came to this position, St. Kitts had less than 25% of its customers, receiving 24-hour water access. Less than 25%. Today, we're inching close to 70%. How were we able to do that? One, we immediately restarted the drilling campaign for our underground aquifers that we had not yet explored. So we first went to one that was identified since back in the previous Labour administration prior to 2015 in Kayon, where we proceeded to drill the well there. That brought significant results. If my memory is correct, we can get upward of 300 to 400,000 gallons of water a day from that well. This is in an area that had challenges with water security for many, many, many years. And so for the first time in decades, Kayon was returned to the ability to produce 24-hour water. There are existing challenges, and there will continue to be existing challenges. For instance, existing infrastructure. We obviously can't do everything all at once, but we were able to find the source. And now we are actually in the process of building larger storage facilities in Kayon to accommodate, at a higher elevation as well, to accommodate the newfound well there, because the present tank that exists is below actually some of the households that need to be fed. So obviously we don't pump water from these tanks, so we have to build a tank higher up to allow gravity to get the water there. So this tank is being built higher, and it's a larger tank. So that's number one that we pushed forward. Number two, we looked at improving infrastructure, pipelines, and all of those things, etc. But importantly, we assessed one of the critical areas, which of course was Bastia, the city center. That's the most populated area. We realized that there were not many other sources for groundwater. That means drilling to find groundwater. And so the decision was made that it was time to move toward desalination. So we acted swiftly and we started the process, because it does take time, obviously, to identify a location, do the feasibility analysis, do the environmental and social impact analysis, do the design, do the construction, building, commissioning, and then integration and interconnection with the system. It does take time. So we proceeded to do that, and we're very pleased that a few weeks ago we were able to fully commission the brand new Bastia desalination plant, such that it gives us the opportunity and the option to have available to us an additional 2 million gallons of water per day to be added to our system. Now, obviously, when you have a commissioning ceremony for a Bastia desalination plant, many will say, hooray, all of Bastia will now have 24-hour water immediately, non-stop. I wish that were true if we had the ability to implement all of the infrastructure one time, that we could change out all of our old pumps, that we could change out all of our old pipes. But that's a continued effort that is happening. So largely, the Bastia desalination plant, which is located in Paul Southwell Industrial Park, provides water to the storage facility in Mon Peak, which is a storage facility in Bird Rock, which is directly connected to most of East Bastia, which includes Frigate Bay, Bird Rock, Newtown, Taylors, come right up to the college by the CFBC College.
Right.
And then there are other tanks that feed other areas. And so what we are doing now is ensuring that the water that we previously used to send to Mon Peak to service areas like Frigate Bay and the whole of East Bastia, Central Bastia, etc., that water that we used to send that way, we're now doing the interconnections to send it westward so that it can also impact communities like Taylors, the western part of Taylors, Shadwell, Pine Gardens, etc. And those things are ongoing. For instance, recently we had a pump that redirects that water. That went down because of electrical issues. And so that's a procurement that we have to go through, but we have to make it work in the meantime. And these are challenges we expect to meet as we build out the system. So what we have accomplished is we now have the water available for us to distribute. We're now fine-tuning our ability to distribute that water throughout Bastia.
And could you tell us, Minister, in terms of the investments that the government made, particularly on the Bastia desalination plant? And of course, there were some partners involved, of course, Republic of China, Taiwan, an important partner. But talk to us a bit about how much money was spent on this particular project.
Right, so the Bastia desalination plant was about a $50 million investment. Now that included everything. So it's not just the plant itself, it included all the designs, the whole everything, including backup generation. So for instance, if there is electricity that cannot be supplied because the Bastia desal plant needs about 1.3 or thereabout megawatts of power, that's significant given our whole requirement for St. Kitts is 30 megawatts. So that's a significant amount of power that is required. So we also invested in the infrastructure to support it when the grid cannot take it or there's some reason the grid has to be off. So that forms part of all of the $50 million investment as well. So it was a whole inclusive process, and we would want to take this opportunity to thank the people and the government of the Republic of China and Taiwan for their partnership in this endeavor. They were able to provide, obviously, concessionary funding to assist us in the development of the Bastia desalination plant.
Right. All right, Minister, I want to touch on it a bit more. Of course, there is so much to cover about the Bastia desalination plant for two reasons. One, it's the largest desalination plant that we have here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Of course, there is a smaller one just outside of, remind me of the area.
Keys,
yes, and
outside of Canada Industrial Estate.
And that's 20,000
That's about 70, could give you about 70,000 gallons. So
Right.
a small percentage of what the other plant can give.
Right, but of course, with 2 million that is capable of producing, that certainly is very impressive. It's an upgrade, significantly. And we, of course, want to talk a bit more about that to get persons to understand, not necessarily the technical aspects of it in terms of reverse osmosis, etc.
Right.
But what having that plant essentially means, because, of course, we saw the groundbreaking, the commissioning on the 24th of February, the commissioning. So we want to talk a bit more about that, but we're going to take another break first. Stay with us, viewers and listeners. We'll be right back with more In Focus.
The government is doing its part. Now we call on you, the consumers, to partner with us in sustainability. Fix leaking faucets, harvest rainwater where possible, turn off taps when brushing teeth, use efficient appliances, report leaks promptly, and please pay for the water that you use.
Welcome back to In Focus. We're having a discussion with the Minister responsible for water, it's the Honorable Konris Maynard, about some of the investments and the upgrades that the government is doing to improve the water situation here in St. Kitts and Nevis, getting us back to 24/7 water supply as much as possible. Minister, we're going to get back into the Basset desalination plant. You mentioned earlier that, of course, its capacity is 2 million gallons. How much is it currently producing?
Right, so it can produce 2 million gallons, but the storage facility or the need in the particular area will determine how much we produce on a particular day. But it is capable, and we tested it and commissioned it to produce 2 million. So it varies depending on the need at the time. Also, it varies on what type of interconnections we are having. So, for instance, we're working on a particular connection that will send some more water over to the Southeast Peninsula. That means it will go up. We're working to see how we can get some more of that water heading westward. It means it will go up. But we have the capacity to produce 2 million gallons per day.
Right. And how does that 2 million compare to the traditional sources where we've drawn water from?
Right, so before desal, we were doing about 100% from rainfall. We did have some support from the Marriott or the Royal Utilities while we were constructing that, put some water into the grid, so a few percentage was added. But now the desal could account from anywhere between 20 to 30% of our supply on a particular day. So it is a significant portion of our production now.
And you mentioned in your address that it actually is more than a lot of the sources that we currently depend on. It's much more than that.
Yes, yes. It is the largest single source that we have. There is no other source on the island that can produce 2 million gallons of water. And it is also one of the purest that you could actually have. I mean, we are traditional and we like to think of nature providing us with water and so on, etc. But our water is surface water and groundwater. Along its way, it passes among everything. So all the minerals in the earth, whether good or bad, the water passes them. So there are some wells that you dig that you can't use because the minerals in the earth are too, their levels are too elevated for human consumption. Mm-hmm. But the good thing about the Basset desal plant is that you can control the quality of the water. And so by time the reverse osmosis is done, we're dealing with literally pure H2O. That has some disadvantages as well. H2O means it has no inhibitors in it. It is highly corrosive, so if you put water on anything that can be oxidized, that will happen, etc. Mm-hmm. Our well water, for instance, has minerals in it that prevents it from interacting with metals in a particular type of way. So, and also H2O has no taste. Mm-hmm. There's no taste at all to it, and we're not accustomed to that. So we actually have to put things back in the water after we have stripped out everything, make sure that it is clean, put things back in the water to achieve a number of things, taste, quality control as it goes through our system.
You mentioned it earlier that some persons may have felt that when the plant was switched on and became operational, that all of the problems that had been experienced in Basset and other areas would have been solved. But that's not quite how it works.
That's not how it works. Why? Because we do not have the ability to address all the problems all at once. Our strategy was get source, make sure we have the water, expend money in ensuring that we have source. Meanwhile, do the critical upgrades of infrastructure, pipeline interconnections and so on. And a lot of that was already done. So the source was done. A major pipeline was built from the source to storage. That's in Monpeak. We did interconnections in the Bastia Valley. So now we are able to pump water from the Bastia Valley. That's the bypass is, westward, that we didn't have before. So some of these things were already done. But we're going to have to continue to upgrade our system. There are other wells that we have to build treatment plants for. We want to build what is called a trunk main, which allows for us to pump water into this trunk main and distribute it to different parts of Bastia and even outside of Bastia. But all of those things are part of the steps going forward. The goal right now is to get the major part of Bastia to 24-hour water. Very shortly, we hope to extend that up into the St. Peter's area. We're also working on an interconnection to do that. And then I guess we'll speak later about the drilling efforts we're doing to get the other 30% of the island back to 24-hour water.
Right, and you touched on, of course, the situation at Shadwell. Recently, the Water Services Department put out a notice that indicated that there was an interruption, and it was because essentially of a pump, as you mentioned. And that's a question that actually someone told me that I need to be sure to bring up to the minister. Why is Shadwell still having challenges?
Right, so Shadwell is fed from a different place other than the Bastia desal plant. Right, so we must establish that. And so although we are pushing water that way, a pump that pushes the water to the storage facility that feeds Shadwell malfunctioned. And so they were working on that for a few days. I believe that it has now been up for a day or two. And we expect, we are in the process now of upgrading that as well. So we do not know for sure how long the fix will work, because that's just the reality of some of these things. But we are putting measures in place to make sure that there is a permanent fix. So this one was not a case that we didn't have water. So we had water, but we couldn't get it into the tank that fed Shadwell because of a pump. And I want to emphasize, this will happen from time to time. Or else when you buy a car, you will never have to service it. You will never have to take it off the road for 2 days or not. And as we build our system and we build more redundancy in the system, even when we take something offline, we'll be able to continue water access. But that is building out over time a resilient water system. Same thing with electricity. The generators need servicing. But if you do not have any spare capacity, then when you have to service that generator, then you have to take somebody offline to do that. It's the same principle. So over the next couple of years, we have maybe a 5 to 10 year strategic plan that we're discussing and we need to finalize in fine print. We want to build that redundancy. And there are projects that are in place to help us to do that, including a Transwater project with the GCF to potentially inject $40 million into upgrading our infrastructural system. So we have created a source. We are working on creating more sources, and we are also concurrently upgrading our infrastructures in places that need the infrastructural upgrade.
And of course, GCF stands for Global Climate Fund.
Correct.
All right. So let's move on, Minister. You touched on it earlier in terms of the wells now, because of course, we saw last year that there were a number of press releases indicating that the government was undertaking in collaboration with a company, a hydrological survey that involved drones and that involved some equipment on the ground. Electrodes were going to be used to determine and of course look at the contours of the land. Maybe I should just let you explain.
Yes,
that's your area.
Very, very simply, we conducted a hydrogeological survey that could identify where bodies of water may exist on the ground. And so that was done last year. We have identified 17 such sites. We have prioritized about 10 based on the need, and we have already started drilling on the first site in Sadler's area. So the drilling has commenced, and we're now a couple hundred feet, or maybe about close to 200 feet into the ground, and we're going to continue that process to get maybe 400, 500, 600 feet down into the ground.
Why Sadler's?
Sadler's because, remember, the Bastia desal plant allows us to realistically deal with Bastia over the next couple weeks and months, redistribute some of the water to the outer portions of Bastia, from, say, West Bastia, let's say from West Farm, heading westward down to Old Road and New Guinea, etc. We have supply for that area. So from Sandy Point, heading westward around to maybe just before Keon, is the area that we need to focus on. And right in the center of that is Sadlers. And so Sadlers affords us the opportunity now to, once we are successful with this well and we find potable water, that it can be directed or transmitted in the nearby storage facilities that will allow us again to do and affect some areas that presently have rationing schedules, and also redirect some water that usually goes to those places to other places to buffer. So it was a strategic point where we will be able to get maximum benefit on the first one.
So you mentioned that it's down several hundred feet. I think you said 600 feet.
Well, I'm not sure how much for each well, but I presume that it's about 400 to 500 feet, if my memory serves me right, to get to the water table.
Okay. And so how soon do we expect that we'll be able to get there, and of course testing will have to be done by that time?
Now that's always a tricky question, and I can put this in terms of what we're going to be doing in Nevis, drilling for geothermal. Drilling is very unpredictable. We don't know what type of stone or material you're going to meet when you're drilling. So it's not really easy to say that it's going to take 2 weeks versus 2 months, because you literally can meet hard rock that takes a long time to get through. You can also meet very, very soft material that you can't go through, because the drill can't. Imagine using a drill to drill something imagine using a power drill to drill through dough. It's not going to go through.
Right.
You have to make the dough maybe hard, right? And that's why, the butchers would prefer to cut meat sometimes when it's frozen. It's easier to put the salt through it. So it is that basic concept. So it started, and over time we'll be able to know when it will be completed. But in general, we usually give about 6 months to go from beginning to end in the well preparation project. So
it's currently being done in Sadlers. You mentioned that there were 10 sites in particular that was going to be main focus initially. Can you tell what those sites are?
Right. I don't have the list up right now, but I can. Perhaps a little later so that I don't waste time. I'll pull it up here to get the list of the areas. But I can tell you that they include Sandy Point, it includes St. Paul's, I think it includes another site in Keon. I'm going to pull up the list if I can, so we could probably go on to the other part of it.
Right. Okay, so the drillers, in terms of their persons who came in from outside, and I think, Minister, I think it's important that we highlight the process for choosing which companies are able to provide this type of service here to St. Kitts and Nevis. Of course, the expertise is not here. And so you have to ensure that the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, that they get value for money. So talk to us a bit about how the process went about in choosing the drillers that were successful.
Right. So this process is by open procurement. So we put a scope together and we launch a tender for anyone in the world really to bid. So this company would have bid, and based on the evaluation, they would have been chosen as the driller. It's as simple as that. An open bid. There are technical requirements to be made, technical requirements to be met, financial requirements to be met, and once the best person meets those, they are chosen.
Right. Okay. You have the list?
Oh, I don't have the list yet. I'm trying to find it. If any of my team looking at it, they can send it to me so I can get the actual names of the locations of the wells, the priority list. I don't want to mislead you at all.
Okay. So outside of those wells, because initially you mentioned, of course, that there were 17, but these areas, of course, were given priority. In terms of, and you mentioned the timeline, but ideally, Minister, Do we expect to see drilling take place one location to another, or will they be concurrent? How will that work?
Right. In this case, it will be concurrent because there is one drill rig. Right. I don't believe the contract required that they have more than one drill rig, and it's a costly endeavor to have more than one drill rig. So when they are finished drilling a well, then they will move on to the next well. So it has to be not concurrent, it has to be one after the other, yes. Right, individually, in series for this particular part. The well can then further be developed, putting in the pumps and so on, etc. afterwards while the other drill position starts or the drilling starts, but it has to be one after the other.
Storage tanks, some persons have asked, is the government planning to build more storage tanks?
Yes, indeed. So not only are we planning, we have already started to build additional storage tanks. So in Keon, we're presently building a 500,000 gallon storage tank. Obviously, we built one at the desal plant, and then next year we intend to continue build out of storage facilities.
And how will that impact the supply of water in those areas? And ideally, is there like a capacity, a total capacity that the government is looking at, depending on the needs of the situation? Because take, for instance, St. Peter's. Of course, we appreciate that St. Peter's is the largest growing community in St. Kitts and Nevis. We've heard that mentioned time and time again. And so, is there influence by, say, statistics from the census that indicates, all right, this is the growing number of businesses, the growing number of houses, the growing number of maybe farms in a particular area? And so will that be used to help to impact the size of the storage facilities that are there, realizing, of course, that you have to, as you mentioned, be proactive and meet the demand that is coming?
Right. So the idea with respect to storage, and I probably want to say this about storage, there is an existing misconception about storage. Some people equate having storage to being able to have water. But I'll give the example as I've given a lot of times before. Let us say, and we need 7 million gallons of water per day for Bastia. And as a result of that, we decide to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to build 21 million gallons worth of storage. It may take about $6, $7, $8 million to build 1 million gallons of storage. So if we're going to build 21 million gallons, you do 21 times 7 and you get the maths, or 8. We would have spent hundreds of millions of dollars to build storage tanks. And let us say persons say, look, all this rain that we get when the guts are running, we should put that water in the storage tank. And let us say we had another set of millions of dollars to direct the water from the guts into those storage tanks. If we need 7 million gallons of water per day, and we've built 21 million gallons of storage, how many days do we have water for? 3 days, because 7 goes 3 times into 21. If we don't have a source that is going to fill that storage tank, the storage tank becomes useless. Mm-hmm. So the reality is, if you have a reliable source, sometimes you don't even need storage tank. What storage does is only give you a buffer. It doesn't increase your ability to have water if you have a consistent source. So that is why we have focused on source, finding source, desalination, drilling, etc. Because if those are functioning, you need less storage in the beginning. Now, in order to build redundancy, in order to build the ability to maintain, take off the plant for a day or two in order to do fixing, mm-hmm. then you need the storage. And industry standard is about 2 to 3 days worth of storage that you need. So we are building out that. So we are probably now about 8 million gallons worth of storage, or building out about that, out that. And over time we will increase that. But our issue is not storage. Our issue is source, a reliable source that we can get continuously. Once we have that, then we can proceed to increase our storage to give us the flexibility to operate properly.
You mentioned, of course, with the desalination being commissioned and operational, that pipes had to be laid to transit water from one area to another. And of course, there is a challenge in terms of the pipes here in St. Kitts and Nevis that they've been there for decades, Minister, and they need upgrading. Where are we with this process?
Right. So that is going to be a continued, extensive process. That is going to continue all the time. And it has been done over time. So especially when we're doing road developments, we use that opportunity to take out old pipes and replace them with upgraded pipes. When we're doing desal, we want to make sure that there is, because there existed a pipe running to that storage already. We could have restricted ourselves and just used that. But no, we put in new infrastructure, new pipelines to be able to distribute the desalination water or transmit it to the storage facility. We continue to do that across the island, putting in new pipes. That is a consistent, ongoing part of our water efficiency and water production operation.
Now, of course, you also mentioned, Minister, that there is a need to modernize the system. Currently, we have a situation where we rely on human resource, whether to turn on or shut off a pump or a well, depending on which area you're talking about. And when there are times of emergencies, say, for instance, that we have heavy rainfall, and there are landslides, or if there's some other areas development that makes the area inaccessible, it affects consumers. What plan is being made to modernize the system, to help to eliminate some of that human reliance, and of course to help with the redundancies as well, which you mentioned is so important?
So there is something called a SCADA system, and very basically, that's basically automating your system. You're correct. Right now, this system is largely dependent on human interaction and human involvement. So someone has to get up in the morning and open a valve, check the source, close a valve, turn on a pump, take off a pump, etc. So part of our strategy, check the levels of the tanks, for instance. So part of our strategy now is to move the water services department to a level of automation that can increase reliability and reduce the workload of the staff, because there are so many things to be done. So one of the first steps we're doing is we are presently in the process of installing remote level monitoring equipment, so that we can stay from anywhere and observe the levels of our tanks that have water, so that someone doesn't have to go and check and report on the level of the tank, because they have to, for instance, there are tanks that are up in mountains, the road is treacherous, and we may only be able to go once a day or a couple times a week. With remote monitoring, we will now be able to check the levels of the tank. Eventually, we want to get to the point where we can take off the valve that is heading to that tank remotely, to minimize that interaction and be able to do it. In modern systems, of course, this is how it is done. There's a control room, and you focus your manpower on the other things that are critical maintenance and building out new infrastructure, etc. Right now, the staff is obviously stretched, and I know that they can't wait for some of these innovations to take place and automation to take place.
Now, the government is investing millions, tens of millions. In fact, it's probably well into 6 digits and I'm talking about in the millions aspect of it, to help to upgrade these systems. But there's an important role that persons can play. And of course, I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak about the conservation aspect of it, because that's important. But I think even more, I wouldn't necessarily say critical, but I think on the same level, Minister, is the necessity for persons to pay their bills. Speak to us about that.
Yes, that is very, very important. So let me start it off this way. Every day of this world in St. Kitts and Nevis, you and I and all of us are going to the supermarket or going to a store, and we're paying about $5. I will use $5 as an average for a gallon of water. It's probably more. I don't know how much is the bigger bottle, but we even pay $5 for this small bottle, which is way less than a gallon. But let's average it out at $5 for a gallon of water. We are willing to pay to the supermarkets or anyone else. Meanwhile, the government is charging us, on average, $7.50 for 1,000 gallons of the same water. Our water quality is good. We have checks. We are checked all the time. Bureau of Standards come to check and ensure that our water quality is good. We have potable water that is distributed in our system. Yet, we are willing to pay $5 and more for 1 gallon from the supermarket, while the government is charging only $7.50. What that equates to is you are willing to pay $5,000 where the government is only charging $7.50. And so what we're saying, we have shown that we are serious about improving the water infrastructure here in St. Kitts. We have invested millions of dollars. We have taken the time. We have done a lot of work to improve our ability to distribute water. We are asking for our citizens and our customers to be part of this journey and pay our water bills. Now, as we know, water is one of the cheapest commodities here in St. Kitts. Somebody joked with us at a town hall that the only thing cheaper is the plot of land that you're going to choose to get buried in. Water is affordable in St. Kitts. It doesn't cost that. It costs more to produce the water that you're getting. So I'm making a plea. The government has clearly shown that it is serious about the investment in water. Come along with us in the journey and pay the bills. There are exceptionally outstanding arrears presently for water. I'm encouraging people, pay the bills, because first of all, I don't want you to lose your water service. I want you to stay connected to your water service and give us the ability to do all the other things that we need to do by simply paying your bills. So I want to encourage all of us to pay our water bill.
And the average bill for a household is probably around, a household of say 3-4 persons is around $20.
Right.
And there are persons I know who will say, well, it's only $20, so I can pay that a bit later on. But when you do that, it begins to add up. And in doing that, it then lessens the amount of revenue that the government has to use to reinvest. Absolutely. In terms of improving. But as we speak about investing in that, Minister, there are a lot of persons who don't value water. Only when it's not there that you begin to recognize how important water is. But unfortunately, even though we have the challenge with the scarcity of water in some areas and some more than others, we see that there are some persons who still have not changed their behavior.
Right.
That they still continue to use the water indiscriminately, have the water running, especially during washing dishes and stuff like that. But there is a role that they can play. Can you speak to us a bit about that in terms of valuing the water that we have access to? Because, of course, you mentioned that there are women around the world who have to walk, talking about the theme, walk for miles and miles just to get a bucket of water. But we turn the tap.
So yes, you know, our history has been that we have thought that we had access to a lot of water. It has always been very affordable to get water in St. Kitts. And it's largely, in large part, especially because of the advancements about 50 years ago, water was generally accessible. And so we have taken for granted where it comes from, how it is delivered to our homes, and the fact that it is very, very inexpensive has caused us to sort of take it for granted. Now, obviously, there are arguments that there are ways to enforce or to improve people's perception of how they should take care of water, one of which is to look at the pricing of water. And I have said before that the government's position is going to be that we are going to incentivize the reduction or conservation of water, and we are going to discourage the waste of water by building it into pricing mechanism and others. But we don't want to have to get to a point where we have to place exorbitant rates just to tell you don't use 10,000 gallons of water per month if you are really supposed to be using 1,000. We want to do a collaborative effort. So one, conservation. Look around your house to see where there are potential leaks. One of the biggest areas for leaks is your toilet. Because you don't see it, you don't hear it unless you're paying attention. And if we have 20,000 households in St. Kitts and they lose just 5 gallons of water through the toilet, that is 100,000 gallons of water we're losing today. We have no system in the government side that is losing 100,000 gallons per day. But we are losing that in households through leaking pipes, leaking faucets, leaking toilets, burst pipes, etc., leaks, etc. That is where we're actually losing a lot of our water. And so I want to encourage that we be vigilant in identifying where we have potential leaks and getting them fixed. Also, when changing out appliances, look for water conscious or water reducing appliances that don't use as much water. Older appliances used to just use all the water, but there are other appliances and faucets and so on, etc. That, and even inexpensive ones that simply help to reduce the water by putting in strainers and all of those things to create the water almost like it's a lot of water, but it's really sprayed very minimally. So we want to encourage persons to be conscious, and we're going to keep rolling out activities. We've done some PR, we're going to keep doing it to encourage conservation, and also, of course, obviously help by paying the bill so that the government can invest in the infrastructure needed to make it more and more reliable.
Any particular benchmarks that you can use for evaluation to see if, I'm not going to say you, of course, I'm talking about the Water Services Department, to see if the message is coming across, if you're seeing a reduction in, you can't necessarily say wastage because you don't know what the water is being used for initially, but is there a benchmark that was used that this household used to use, or this community, we've seen a reduction in their use of water?
Yes, you can, because we generally know, and there are standards that are set. So even in maybe the World Health Organization or these institutions, they have identified standards of how much water is needed via a modern household to exist comfortably. I don't remember the figure offhand, whether it is 50 to 100 gallons per day per person, whatever it is. We can use that as a benchmark to look to see, okay, we have 20,000 households, 40,000 people. If everybody is using X amount of gallons, how much water should we be using in this space? Or in specific areas, we have a tank, we know how much water is coming out, we know the areas that it is feeding, how many households. We do a quick calculation so that we can know in general how much water is being used and how much is being wasted. Obviously, we have our own fixes to do. We have aging pipelines and so on that every now and then they're going to break down and we have to repair. That is ongoing. We are doing that. We want persons to do the same thing on their side of the fence, which is on the residential and commercial side of the fence.
So what does the incentivizing look like? Is there a model as yet?
Right. So obviously, we want to ensure that low water usage attracts a low tariff. And obviously, we need to have the discussion of where there is excessive water usage, then it attracts excessive tariffs to discourage that, except obviously in cases where that is how it's supposed to be. But that is not something that is finalized as yet. That is something that we want to engage the public on, to have a proper review of what it is. The water rates have not changed for in excess of 20 years. I don't know that there's anything else that hasn't changed, probably only that spot that we all have to go to in the cemetery is probably the only one. And so we have to realistically look at that. It doesn't cost $7.50 for us to produce 1,000 gallons of water. It costs more. And so we want us to be a part of that process.
All right. So, Minister, long term, where do you see St. Kitts and Nevis in terms of water security here? And they can say over the next 5 years.
Yes.
Because, of course, we're transitioning towards a sustainable island state.
Right. So I believe that the efforts that we are putting in with the infrastructural development, with the awareness campaigns, with the sensitization, etc., with the public, with the engagement, I believe our future is very bright in terms of water sustainability. In fact, as I said, when I came to this office, less than 25% of the people had access to 24-hour water. We're inching closer to 70%. By the time we interconnect St. Peter's and the rest of Bastia, we'll probably be at 70%. And then we're drilling in areas that will then help us to move to 100%. So in the not too distant future, I expect that we can broach the 100% marker of having 24-hour water service around the island of St. Kitts. That's a real possibility because of the real investment that this St. Kitts Nevis Labour Administration has been doing in water, because we have made it a priority. We have put in capital We have invested, we have spoken about it, we are diligent in how we approach this, and so we expect that the results we are getting, we will continue to get them in the short term.
Minister, we're just about out of time for this program, but there, of course, was a recent engagement that you participated in Taiwan. Can you just, for the benefit of those who are listening to this program, tell us a bit about the mission to Taiwan and what you were able to accomplish?
Right. So thank you for that. As always, we want to give a big thank you to the Republic of China and Taiwan for their enduring relationship with the government and people of St. Kitts and Nevis. And they would have facilitated a technical mission to Taiwan with the Minister of Sustainable Development et al., Dr. Joya Clark, and myself, who led the delegation on a number of things. One, we were able to sign an agreement for microgrid development at SKNIS, which is going to be a solar panel and battery installation at a SKNIS facility in order not only to provide energy, but also to do it as a study of how these things work as we transition into a number of things that are happening. Rooftop solar for everyone, where they can pay their get a credit from SKNIS, the big solar project that is about to be launched for RFP with battery energy storage. This microgrid allows for SKNIS themselves to have first-hand experience in how it is done, developed, experience dealing with it, etc. So we want to thank them for that. But we also were able to do a number of things, engage with, for instance, Taipower, which is the electricity utility company in Taiwan, to make direct links with SKNIS so that technical expertise can be shared as we develop our energy grid and modernize our energy grid. We looked at the facility that is taking our recycled bottles and turning them into clothes and bags. That was really a fascinating experience to know that the bottles that were collected here, the plastic bottles, have been transformed into clothes and bags, etc. We also looked at the facility that is producing our digital ID card. We entered a facility where the security was much tighter than any security we have here in St. Kitts, because they do Visa and MasterCards, etc. And so only one person could go through the door at a time. You have to get checked and all sorts of things. But we were able to see firsthand the production of our soon-to-be-released digital ID card, which has the same level of security as any top credit card around the globe. I think it's about 8 significant security features in embedded chips and the microchip to be able to track to ensure that it is you, the person who is using the card, etc., and authenticate the user so nobody can duplicate you or pretend to be you, rather. So we were able to see that as well. And so the experience was extraordinary. Obviously, we learned a lot. We made additional connections. We, of course, we developed environmental partnerships as well. And they continue to give their commitment to work with us in our development, and we are eternally grateful for their support.
Right, and as you mentioned, the recycling facility in Taiwan, where our waste is being converted into clothes and bags. We actually saw last week where there was an expansion of the recycling facility here at the Solid Waste Management Corporation. And they are going to now also include aluminum and cardboard in terms of recycling, and a new baler was received. So that's something that we can look forward to in terms of more recycling, of course, with, as we mentioned, the Sustainable Island State Development. And Minister, before you leave, of course, I must mention that we expect to hear a lot more from you during the Cabinet press conference.
I'll give you the sites. I was trying to find the priority sites, but I'll give you all the sites, right, because it's going to be among these. So there was one site in Keon, 2 sites in Molyneux, 2 sites in Tabernacle, 1 in Bellevue, 2 sites in Sadlers, 1 site in Deep Parsons, 1 site in St. Paul's, 1 site in Newton Ground, 3 sites in Sandy Point, 1 site in Stonefort, 1 site in Challengers, and 1 site in Old Road. I can tell you that the first 3 that I remember of the priority would be Sadlers, St. Paul's, and Sandy Point.
And just for persons who may not have been aware, we're talking, those are the sites for where the new drills,
Right.
New wells will be
So
explored.
those sites are the sites that we've identified for drilling,
Right.
and those first 3 are what we identified as priority.
Right, Minister, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, as I was mentioning, we'd like to encourage you to tune into the Cabinet press conference on Monday, March 30th at 9:30 a.m. and you'll be able to hear a lot more about some of these projects from Minister Maynard and other Cabinet colleagues on projects that the governments are undertaking. In the meantime, I'm Ian Richards. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of InFocus. We trust that you will join us next week at the same place at the same time. Remember, it's an InFocus. It's your government, your business.
Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.